welcome to the Montreal International Film Festival. This is the Insider Approaches podcast, and I'm really happy and glad to be joined today by Jonathan English, filmmaker and producer to our program. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, nice to be here.
So let's dive right in. I want to sort of talk about the nitty-gritty of where you're at right now before we sort of start with your background. What are you doing presently right now in your career?
I am producing American network television shows. I've just completed season 2 of The Ark, which I make for Sci-Fi. I produce these shows with Dean Devlin, the famous producer of Independence Day and Stargate. And I've done a lot of television shows with him and his company, Electric. And so we're doing season 2 of The Ark right now for Sci-Fi. And we literally wrapped 10 days ago. And I'm about to start this coming Monday, the 4th, on The Librarians, the next chapter, which is one of Dean's very famous TV shows. And it's a European spin-off of The Librarians, basically, which we're shooting here in Europe, and season 1 of the new spin-off of that show.
Okay, and so you mentioned The Ark that you've just wrapped. First of all, when is that going to be released? When can people stream that?
In July, I believe. Sci-Fi Network in the US premieres in July, I believe. I think it goes out in July, and soon after on various Sci-Fi networks, or NBCU, which has Sci-Fi in the rest of the world, then premieres soon after through the rest of the year.
Okay, so you talk a lot about how now you're working in sort of American television, that side, but I know that you started your career with Ironclad. That was your big breakthrough. Tell us a little bit about the beginning of your career and venture into this wonderful world of filmmaking.
Well, I had an unusual path in the sense that I started as a producer. I mean, I was at film school. I went to film school, and for some reason I kind of went into the producing program at film school and graduated as a producer and continued working as an independent producer until I started at a very young age producing my first feature films, which were low-budget British feature films. And then eventually I got into producing co-productions and being like the UK co-producer on various co-productions around Europe. And then at a certain point, I started getting a little frustrated with producing. I mean, it's a hard job, and it's a very hard job to do as a young person. I think that's the truth of it. It's a hard job to do at any time, but when you're young, it's an exceptionally hard job. And I certainly found it very hard to do when I was younger. Although looking back, I had some success. I got a lot of films made and some bigger films with some well-known people. But eventually I got into directing, and then I started directing, and then I really, I think I sort of rediscovered my passion for the business and for filmmaking, which producing definitely hammers out of you. and then I wrote and directed and produced Ironclad, which kind of put me on the map for like 5 minutes. And then I was trying to produce other films. I was living in Los Angeles. I lived in LA for 12 years, and I was trying to get other films made there, of course. And then at some point I moved to Belgrade, and then I started this company in Belgrade, and got into network television, which is something I was basically trying to do. Had I stayed in LA and tried to get into network television, it probably wouldn't have happened.
I want to just go back to a thing that you said about it's really difficult to get into the industry as a young producer. Can you sort of talk a bit more about what were some of the struggles and things you had to overcome to get into that as a producer?
I think if you're trying to produce when you're younger, the first challenge is simply the first job, the main job of a producer is to raise money to make a film or a TV show. I mean, if you're the producer, you're basically responsible for making the show happen. And so as a young producer, you're trying to raise money to produce a film and or a TV show, and that's obviously hard to do as a young person, because you may not have the contacts to raise money, and you certainly won't have the experience. You may not have the contacts, and you probably won't have the knowledge, because everything to do with finance and raising finance takes many, many years to learn, and you certainly won't have the experience. So, as a young producer, if you do raise money, it's either through luck or through being lucky with a connection. I mean, either way, it's luck, basically. I think anybody that gets movies made when they're young, whether you're a producer or a director, there's a lot of luck, even with the most talented people. I mean, in this business, you have to be very lucky.
So would you say that for you that it was luck then, or would you say that it was connections, network?
Well, there obviously was a degree of luck, because I got things done, but I never felt lucky. I mean, I was working very, very hard, and I always felt the steps that I did make were kind of very small, and they never seemed to succeed. This is the thing. The films that I got made didn't turn out or work particularly well, and I sort of felt after each film that I was sort of almost in the same place, that my career hadn't really moved forwards in any significant way. I mean, I'm going back to the earlier films and the earlier films that I produced. Those were just not films that put me on the map in any significant way. But of course, what did happen is that with every film, I gained a lot of experience, and I grew contacts. So I got to know more people, and I gained experience. And with that, I would go into the next project, and I suppose each project that I was producing as a young producer got a little bit larger, and I would kind of make the connections and put people together that I'd met. And it was only when I made Ironclad as a writer, director, and a producer, that was, I think, one of the first times I truly felt lucky getting that movie made. Although it didn't feel lucky at the time. I mean, it felt like a real slog to get that movie financed. And when it was finally financed, it felt like it could fall apart any minute. And it was, financed and produced under very difficult circumstances, and I felt under a lot of pressure. So while I was directing it, I didn't feel lucky at the time. It's only since I've been producing these TV shows here in Belgrade that I felt continuously very, very lucky.
So would you say then that going from sort of filmmaking into television, those two different industries, that television is much more of a assured network? You're saying that you feel much more confident and comfortable in the TV sector as opposed to the film industry?
It is a much more consistent, balanced industry. Yeah, I mean, it's more consistent, it's more steady. I think it always has been. It's not so fickle, I would say. It's not so fragile as the film end of the business. I mean, independent film, which is really what I was in, has always been a very fickle, very fragile, very volatile business. It's very hard. It's always been very hard to raise financing for films, very hard to get actors attached to films, to secure the distribution for films. And it's very hard to, with all of those sort of forces, it's very hard to have a career as a filmmaker, whether you're a producer or a director or a writer in independent film. It's very hard to have something that feels like a consistent career. As an actor as well, I would say the same. Whereas television is just a much more, I think, consistent business. So, and now probably even more so than before. And I would say film, independent film, is even worse now than it was. At least when I was in it, there was quite a big industry. But now I think, with the advent of streaming and Netflix and Amazon and all of these things and long format TV shows, I think, as we all know, a lot of independent film has just really died, and the industry has sort of pretty much collapsed from what it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
I want to also now just go back to something that you were mentioning about when you lived in LA for 12 years, and you talk about that it wasn't maybe what you'd expected it to be. And I think that people look at LA as sort of either it's the place where dreams go to die or you really make it. What was your experience living there for 12 years? When you went in, what was your vision of it? And when you left, what was your vision of it?
Um, it's a really good question. Well, I went there as a director. I had directed a film already. So I went there, and I was sort of offered a management deal from a management company that was making films. And I thought things were going to happen very quickly, and then they didn't. And that company that signed me, in fact, didn't produce the project that I was expecting that they would. So then that forced me into kind of doing my own thing, which then turned out to be Ironclad. And then when I finally got Ironclad made a couple of years later, things changed. I got signed by a big agency. And, as I said, it sort of put me on the map for a moment. And I did the rounds in terms of like meetings with all of the studios. I went up and I pitched for a lot of big movies. And, for a moment, you feel like a lot of things are going to happen, but then they didn't. And so I sort of went back into developing my own projects. And it's all very humbling, that stuff. I mean, you learn a lot about the industry out there, and you learn about how you need to behave and the networking. It's a tough place to be. It takes a lot of time to get to know the town. I mean, when you talk about LA, there is LA as a city for normal people, and then there is the town, as in for the industry. And people say it takes several years before you kind of really understand the town, and I think that's very true. Certainly, it was for me. But then after about 3 years, I started making a lot of very good friends, filmmakers, actors, writers. There's actually a community of incredibly creative and artistic people living in LA who have just chosen to live in LA because there's work there. And so I made a lot of very good friends who are still good friends to this day. And then, it also takes a little bit of time to find where you want to live in LA. I mean, just simple things. In most European cities, it's obvious where you need to live because there's the center of the city and everything makes sense. Whereas in LA, nothing makes sense. And it's very confusing where you should even be living until you start to meet people that you like, and then you understand where they live, and you understand the town and where all the agencies are and where the studios are, and you kind of start to get the logic of the whole place. And it just takes a little bit of time, but it certainly, in the end, I enjoyed it. I mean, I stayed there for such a long time, and I became an American citizen because I did enjoy it. And you can also have a very nice quality of life in LA without having to be a multi-millionaire. I mean, you can, the lifestyle there is actually very nice, and it's very healthy, and now I think the town has changed a lot. The city has changed a lot, like a lot of cities in the world. I mean, in the last 10 years, it's become much more expensive, and also a lot of people left. I mean, weirdly enough, most of the people I knew, who I got to know, all left. They either went to other places in America or they went back to Europe. And the very few of the people that I was, that was sort of in my network are still in LA. mean, some of them are, but many of them are not. And I think that sort of happened around the time I was leaving, and then particularly with COVID. I think COVID could have scattered people who then didn't come back. And everyone's realized that you can actually have this kind of remote lifestyle or remote career, and you can choose your lifestyle. You don't have to be, there's no need to be in LA anymore. So yeah, but I'm glad I was there, because I learned a lot about the industry and, you know, the mystery of LA, and do you need to be there? And I guess for everybody, if you want to be in the industry, it's a good idea, and it's great to spend a little bit of time in LA if you can, even if it's just for a year, I mean, or a couple of years.
So for young people who might be looking then to get into producing or filmmaking, would you suggest LA as a part? Like you're saying, it's a must for at least maybe a year to experience it. But what are the other things that maybe you would advise for young people? What are your like top tips on, yes, do this, and no, please forego this?
It's a good question. Well, it's certainly not necessary to go to LA. I mean, in the top tips, I wouldn't ever say going to LA is one of them. I think that's just a choice if you're drawn to that. I think it's very important to know what you want to do in the business. You know, it's a hard business. There's no question. The business is tough, and it's very important to know what you want to do and to really focus on that, in the sense of writing or acting or directing or producing. You know, it's not a business that's, I think, particularly kind to anyone, and it's certainly not kind to people who are sort of just drifting through it, kind of trying to decide if it's for them or not. You have to be, I think, very decisive about, you want to be in this business and this is what I want to be, and you have to be very focused on that. That doesn't mean you can't change what you're doing in the business once your kind of things are moving, as I myself did. And I think there's many great careers, I mean, incredible careers of people that have actually, you know, started as actors and then started producing, and vice versa, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing I would say. I think you have to work incredibly hard. I mean, it's a business where you just have to work really hard. It's a business where you have to be lucky. But the point is that you need to work as hard as possible to maximize your chances of being lucky. That would be one of my big, kind of mottos, is work as hard as possible to maximize your chances of being lucky. But you do have to be lucky. Even if if you're a producer or a director trying to get a movie made, you need to be lucky to raise the money, and you need to be lucky to get the movie made. But then you also need to be lucky that it turns out well. Because a lot of people have got movies made, and they're very talented people. They're very intelligent people. They can even be quite experienced, but the movies don't turn out very good. I mean, one of the hardest facts of this business is most films don't turn out very good. That's not something a lot of people like to talk about, but it's just true, you know, and most first-time filmmakers' films don't turn out very good. So you have to be incredibly lucky when you're actually making the film that it actually turns out well. And I think to be very aware, if somehow being aware of that before you make the film and as you're making the film, it's not going to make you lucky, but it somehow, I think, can help in the process. If we were all more aware of that fact. Certainly looking back at my work, I wish I was more aware of, just that I was more aware of the process as I was going through it and what I could be doing to maximize the chances of the quality of the film, the quality of the work turning out better.
Last question I wanted to ask, and I meant to ask it before, but what would you say in your career has been the highlights, something that maybe it's something you're doing or something you're going to do, and what's maybe been sort of the low light of your career that you've learned from, though, nonetheless?
Well, Let's start with the low. The lowest experience. I mean, the worst experience I ever had was when I was young and I was producing and I was getting films made. I got to make some bigger films as a young producer, and one of the films was called A Good Woman with Scarlett Johansson and Helen Hunt. And I was a very young producer at the time. I think I was about 28 years old. It was a pretty large movie with Scarlett Johansson. She'd already made Lost in Translation and Girl with the Pearl Earring. And, that was all set to be my big breakout, movie as a young producer. And the movie went over budget. We made the movie in Italy, and the movie went over budget before we'd even started shooting, and by a lot of money. I can't tell you how much, but it went a lot of money over budget before we'd even started shooting. And I was completely ill-equipped to deal with what happened as a result of that, and the enormous pressure that kind of bore down on me and the other members of the production, from the financing group that were behind the film and the completion bond company that's basically like the insurance company. And it was absolutely horrendous. It was like hell in paradise. And it literally made me want to leave the business. It was really bad. So, and it was probably that experience that actually pushed me out of producing and made me want to start directing. So maybe that was a good thing.
Because you say it made you want to leave the business. What is it that kept you in the business? If that was, I mean, the amount of pressures you're.
But I have a theory that in this business, because it's a harsh business, for all of the amazing highs and euphoria that you can experience in this business, whether it's having a successful film, making a film that people love, making a film that wins awards, or just making a lot of money. I mean, whatever it is, there's a lot of highs in this business. But I also have a theory that in this business, because it's very harsh, every 10 years you'll have an experience that's so horrible, so bad, it will want to make you leave the business. Every 10 years that'll happen. And it's been like that for me as well. So that was one of them when I was, about 28, 29, 30 years old. That happened. Because the fallout of when a film goes over budget, and it went over budget by a lot, we did actually deliver the film on budget in the end, because we lost all our fees. I mean, all the producers, I lost my fee, everything. It was also, I was in my 20s and I was going to make a lot of money off this film, and I lost everything. I think I paid the phone bill. So, that entire process, took a good year, 2 years to sort of wrap up. So by the end of it, I felt like an old man, and I never wanted to produce a film again. Yeah. But what was the next question? I lost track.
So your low light and then your highlight, the best thing that's happened so far.
Well, producing the television shows that I'm now doing, because I really wanted to get into television. While I was still living in LA, I desperately wanted to get into television. I sort of saw the way the industry was going. I saw that the independent film scene was kind of slowing down and already beginning to die and transform. And so I really wanted to get into TV. And if somebody had said to me, oh, well, if you move to Belgrade, Serbia, you'll end up producing American network television, of course, I would have said, well, how's that going to happen? But that's exactly what happened. I was here. I was trying to get another movie made here. I was trying to do a film in Greece that didn't happen. And various people, friends from Los Angeles and London heard that I was living here. And I really wasn't looking to start a company or to start producing again, but I got offered a couple of jobs that was hard to turn down. And then I very quickly got offered season 2 of a show called The Outpost, which was made by CW and NBCU. And they were the creators of that show were looking for somewhere to make season 2. They'd made season 1 in Utah. The network wanted a season 2, but they needed somewhere better, cheaper, and where the money would make a better show. And this was, without question, pure luck, in the sense of the first time in my career where it was, they knew me, they knew my film Ironclad. And Serbia was sort of very quickly becoming a kind of key production center in Europe. There was a rebate here, so there was a lot of appeal. But they were kind of unsure. They'd sort of scouted other countries in the region and weren't terribly convinced. But it was the fact that I was here, the filmmaker behind Ironclad, which was thematically, stylistically similar to what they were trying to do with their show. And the fact that I was here in Belgrade, and it was the combination of that. And that's pure luck. I mean, it was pure luck. I would say that this happened. And then they gave me a lot of freedom because I had 25 years of experience. They gave me a lot of freedom to produce the show and to run the show here. And so the network loved the show, and then we got season 3. And then we got season 4. And then other networks came, and I produced SEAL Team for CBS. And then I produced a couple of movies for Legendary and Focus. And then we started producing The Ark for Sci-Fi. And now another show for CW. So I've done about 70 episodes of American network television now in the last 4 or 5 years.
Oh my God. And then when was the last 10-year low? Just so I know at what point we're going to expect the low.
Oh, well, that actually did happen. That I produced a film for a company that I can't mention, but it was a very challenging experience, and it reminded me of how challenging this business can be. Even here, with as much control as I have over things here, and as different as things are for me now, still, the business can be challenging. You can, there can be a lot of personalities in this business that are uncompromising, which is sometimes okay, but sometimes it's not.
Great. Well, I mean, you've given me so many stories. I loved all the stories, and I think that everything you've said, especially about the side of Hollywood and the side of TV and film that people don't talk about and avoid talking about, I feel like you've really unveiled it and very much explained your hardships, where you've come from, what you've done. And I think that it's an incredible career that you have right now, and you've ended up where you wanted to be. So that's the most important thing.
I truly am. I've never felt happier and luckier, and working with some great people. Dean Devlin in particular has become a great partner. John Glenn is a showrunner that I work with a lot. I'm now developing material. So I'm now basically producing shows, but also developing my own material. So I've kind of gone full cycle back into writing, and about to start writing and producing my own shows as well. So yeah, it's been a long journey, but I'm very happy with where I am, and trying to be as creative as possible.